Hi, Kristen. How's it going?
Hi, doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Great noise. How are things in the US? All good?
All good. Everybody's, trying to move forward and trying to, overcome all of the challenges of coronavirus and
Hmm.
all of the latest things in the news.
That's great. That's great. And hopefully things will get better and we can all go back to our normal lives.
Yes, yeah, or a better than normal.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're here to talk about sports and sustainability, and I feel you're the expert in this subject. So why don't you first tell us about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So I will start by saying one of many experts, and we can talk more about that later. But thank you. So my background is actually in architecture and design. I grew up loving buildings and still love the beauty of physical building design, and have spent a lot of my life chasing beautiful buildings. I travel a lot just to see a famous building or
Hmm.
an architect's new project, and have always appreciated sports as a hobby, and so it's new to me to bring kind of the buildings and sports and my passion and professional experience of sustainability all together.
Right, right. So, how was your journey growing up? Like, were you always interested? I mean, did you play any sports when you were young? Go. Mhm.
Maybe recreationally. I think anyone who was listening to this who had seen me play would say no. I enjoyed playing sports, but much more enjoyed watching sports and admiring amazing athletes that could do things that I couldn't.
Right, right. So you grew up in North Carolina. Yeah, somewhere around there, right?
Yep. Yeah. North Carolina. So North Carolina, is an interesting place because you have access to everything, beach and ocean, and
Hmm.
it's right in the middle of the East Coast of the US. So even though there's not a really big city in North Carolina, you're really close to quite a lot, and sports is really prominent in North Carolina, especially college basketball, but other professional sports as well in all of the kind of close by cities. Um, Specifically, the area that I'm from is called the Triangle. So it's made up of three different smaller towns, all of which have really good college basketball programs in the ACC conference. And so basically, if you are born in this area, must pick one of these three schools to support. And so my team is Duke, and then there's really the rivalry between Duke and UNC, but other close by teams as well. So it's always a point of conversation, and it really got me interested in kind of the competitive side of sports and really the camaraderie and community as well.
Right, right. So yeah, so tell us more about the local sports culture. Like when you talk about rivalries, I mean, coming from India, we don't have such a thing where of course, colleges compete, but we don't have that culture where parents of the athletes are just rooting for the college and things like that. So how is it exactly over there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is kind of a communal experience where if maybe your child starts going to a university, you might start paying attention more to that teams,
Right.
the teams associated with those schools. I think a lot of it just has to do with that kind of affiliation and feeling that kind of personal connection to the teams. And I think in the same way in professional sports, I meet people all the time that, let's say, they live in New York, but maybe they're originally from Milwaukee, and kind of the center of the country, a relatively smaller city, and they will keep that loyalty to those teams that they grew up loving. It's so much about loyalty and that kind of feeling of home,
Right.
and I really think that's what it's about.
Interesting, interesting. So, do you think that sports can bring the world together, unify people and just make it a better place?
I think so, for one, a simple reason, it makes people healthier.
Yeah.
Athletes tend to be healthier, take care of themselves, in tune with their body, and try to protect their body. And then, kind of more fundamentally, I do think it's kind of a universal language. We call it soccer here, I guess, in the US, but the game of soccer or football is played all around the world, and you don't have to even speak the same language as someone to be able to have that connection with them. And so I think it's a really good way to communicate, and share connections with people. And it also has an amazing power to help create change in the world. So if you see your favorite athlete doing something really interesting or exciting, you're probably pretty likely to think that's a good thing and want to do it yourself. So I think sport has the power to change people as well.
Yeah, I mean, athletes are like one of the biggest influencers, especially with social media and stuff. So definitely. And so, yeah, when you mentioned soccer, how is soccer doing in the US now? Are things picking up or?
I'd say it's definitely picking up. When I was growing up, I would say most of the youth in my, class, let's say, played some kind of soccer, whether, on a kind of recreational team or for the school, both boys and girls. And so, that's the younger generations. I know it's really popular, and then kind of moving up towards the professionals. The US women's national team is amazing and
Yeah, we
sets all sorts of records. And so it's really exciting for me to see a female
Mhm.
led sport really get national attention and excitement. Unfortunately, though, that they don't play all the time together. There is the Major League Soccer, men and women, that is gaining traction for sure, but isn't a mainstay in professional sports like football and basketball here
Sure.
in the
Yeah,
US.
so in our subcontinent, we do follow MLS whenever one of our favorite players, goes to your league. So
Mhm.
that's the only time we actually follow the sport. So I mean, it has a long way to go, I'm sure.
I think so. I think here in the US, if you asked most soccer fans what their favorite teams are, they would say probably Premier League. I
Right.
think a lot of people look at the Premier League as kind of the soccer and clubs to watch. And here in the US, they're accessible by television, so that makes it easier as well. Where some of the other ones, Bundesliga, maybe sometimes is, or other leagues as well.
Sure. So, okay. Uh, why don't you tell us what exactly you mean by sustainability in sports?
Yeah, sure. Well, it goes to a bigger question of what does sustainability mean?
Yeah.
And I like this question, but it's also really challenging because it can mean so many different things. And I think part of the difficulty in talking to people about sustainability is that they can't really know what it means, or they can't picture it, or maybe they picture very, one specific element of it. So sustainability to me is kind of about three pillars, sometimes called the three P's: people, planet, and profit. And
Right.
so I think a lot of people think of sustainability as the planet piece. So energy savings, water savings,
Sure.
waste reduction. And in sports, that makes sense because it saves money in operations of the venue. And it's also very visible. We can all see garbage in cans and know that there might be a waste problem. And it's easy to connect with fans over those elements because they have a direct impact on some of that work. So they can see, okay, maybe I shouldn't be recycling my plastic bottle, or maybe there's food waste. If I don't want to finish my meal, I can actually compost it, and the stadium helps me do that.
Right.
The people piece is probably much more important post coronavirus. because, everybody's thinking about their health and will be hyper conscious of their surroundings and for their personal health when they do go back to stadiums. And so I think that the people piece of sustainability is really big now, and it always has been, but hasn't been at the forefront, especially in sports. So all of a sudden sports venues are thinking about the air quality and what the physical buildings can do to promote healthy people. And there's actually a lot that buildings can do to filter the air quality or to design for people to move actively but separated. And there's just so many ways that those two things connect as well, the environmental piece and the people piece. And then the third one is profit, which of course, you can't have a sustainable business if there is no business. And the financial success has to make sense, or the financial stability has to make sense, because if it doesn't, companies will not continue to pursue efforts to kind of promote the people and the planet. It has to make business sense.
Sure. So when you mention this, do you see government taking steps towards it, or should the private entities work on their own, regardless of government interference or support?
Yeah, well, I think it's always better when everybody works together towards a shared mission. Here in the U.S. right now, our political climate leads me to answer that I think, right now corporations and private companies have the opportunity to really become leaders in this. Right. I think that answer changes, at least here in the US, depending on kind of the current political climate, and really, who's in office and who the decision makers are. I think what we're seeing right now, at least in the US, especially in the wake of coronavirus and the racial justice movement of Black Lives Matter, which has been in the forefront, especially lately, is that, corporations have a huge amount of opportunity to step up and really show that they are driven towards mission. And, kind of historically, corporations are thought of as just money makers, of the 3 Ps, they're just the profit. But really they can kind of integrate themselves into communities much more effectively if they have the people and the planet components as well. And so it's been interesting to see corporations step up and make really big financial contributions for people in need, or take a very strong political position, especially when our government might not be doing that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we've been getting the news, especially with Jordan and so many of these brands, committing huge amounts basically for these social issues, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement and all that.
Absolutely, it's really great to see. And I mean, I think my answer was not necessarily even specific to sports, but within sports, we were talking a few minutes ago about the power of sports and really the ability to create positive change. And I think it's only enhanced by those types of contributions and commitments, and also the realization that, the types of people that play sports look much different than the types of people that watch sports. And so the importance of being inclusive and diverse in addressing different issues in really interesting ways, and also highlighting things that are problems but might not come up in the mainstream news. And so unfortunately, it seems like athletes are kind of taking on that responsibility. Right. I say unfortunately because I wish other people would as well, but it's really great that athletes are using their platform to talk to their fans about why this is so important.
Sure. And now that you mentioned fans, why don't you talk to us a bit about home field advantage and what you mean by that?
Sure. Yeah, I've been talking to people who live outside the US to kind of gauge their understanding of this concept. Yes. So maybe, the concept makes sense, but the phrase might not. So to me, home field advantage is really, it touches all five senses of, when you are at your favorite team's stadium or venue, you're going to the first game of the season, maybe there's this kind of five, all sensory feeling of excitement and loyalty and being proud. There's maybe sights and sounds and even smells that you think of when you think of that home crowd or that home field. And in growing up, this came through because I was such a big fan of Duke basketball. The home field advantage of Cameron Indoor Stadium, where Duke basketball plays, is so intense and well known and widely either respected or hated, depending on who you are. And so I think it's just so interesting to think about how important that home field is. And so from the sustainability perspective, there's really a lot of untapped ways that sports organizations can kind of hone in on sustainable features to create that home field advantage and that fan loyalty and excitement. And so I think some of that has happened right now with the wake of coronavirus. And, maybe a fan in New Orleans here in the US sees that Zion Williamson is donating his personal money, he's a rookie, to their local organizations. And so to me, this is home field advantage. This is the local teams benefiting from pro sports and the generosity of athletes and teams in a way that they wouldn't if that team didn't exist there. And so they might be more loyal to it and be bigger fans because of it.
Right. And so when you mentioned home field advantage, I mean, we've heard so many times that there have been situations where basically the fans have won the matches for their teams, just by, striking out their opponents and stuff like that.
Absolutely. It's pretty amazing. I think that power, on my website, I describe it as magic. I think it really is kind of magic. And so, there's so many different ways that this can be enhanced. If you are making your fans as happy as possible, chances are they will be fighting harder for doing what they can to get your team to win. And if you're showing that you're taking care of them too, that you're helping that people side and maybe even the planet side, chances are they're going to be more excited. And I'll also mention that from my background in architecture and design, and especially corporate real estate, we talk a lot about how buildings affect people's performance, reduce their sick days in the office, or even, make sure they concentrate really well at work. And so there's also elements to really actually enhance the athlete performance as well in buildings. And so that's home field advantage too. If they are in a building that's really promoting their performance and, getting them to play as well as possible, that's home field advantage too.
Great. So what responsibility does the sports clubs have towards this, towards sustainability in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for a long time it was debated as, sustainability is a nice to have, but not necessary. And so I think of the word responsibility as being something that's more necessary, that you kind of need to do. And I think teams are starting to realize that it is a responsibility because, fans and especially corporate partners are looking for organizations that are mission driven and aligned in those missions and values. And really, the responsibility also comes because of their amount of impact on the community. I think, at least in the US, we're realizing that if someone can have a positive impact and take a stance and really create change, they have a responsibility to do that. Because of the Black Lives Matter movement right now, There's, a lot of talk of silence being complicit. Basically, if you don't say something or speak out on an issue, you're just as bad as the people who are against it.
Right.
And so it really needs to be a responsibility of sports organizations to take this on, because they have such a huge platform and potential to do that. And their stakeholders are the ones that really benefit from them doing this. And so they have a responsibility to that huge amount of stakeholders.
Definitely. So how can these corporate partners, these sponsors and brands who associate with the club take advantage of sustainability, basically use it to their advantage?
Yeah, well, I think, in the corporate world, all of these brand partners, major, maybe global, international corporations, or maybe even just local, have a mission and a commitment to drive some kind of sustainability initiative forward. And that's because of this movement towards kind of more impact driven business. And so I think that, in some ways, brand partners can look to their the sports organizations that they affiliate themselves with and use that sports team to help communicate their corporate mission, or maybe even carry out some of the goals that they've committed to achieving. And so, I think this becomes much more of a partnership instead of a one-sided benefit.
Right.
Where before, the brand partner, if they're giving money towards a team, they might have a few physical assets on sites, and maybe their company name is the name of the stadium, or maybe they just have some signage up with their logo on it.
Right.
But what if they could actually do activations with fans that help fans understand what those companies are about and what they do, and then therefore kind of communicates to fans that their teams care about this work too.
Sure. So, could you give us some of the brand activations that you've come across, or that companies can use, to make things more sustainable?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a ton of great examples, and I think, interestingly, there's a lot of great examples that people don't even know about because it's either not well publicized or not well quantified. And so I think we have a huge amount of potential to do better in that kind of communicating those synergies and efficiencies.
Right.
Some examples that I really like to use here, may be relevant globally, are recent Super Bowl champions, Philadelphia Eagles, who won the Super Bowl a few years ago, but have just been really kind of leaders in sustainability for a long time. This is because of people in their leadership team who are passionate about this, the ownership that is interested in kind of committing priorities to this, including money and also just initiatives to engage fans. And they've actually created some specific sustainability partners. A lot of teams do, but I think at the Eagles, it's really effective. So just a quick example would be our utility providers here in the US are privatized. And so one of them is NRG. And so NRG is a large utility provider here in the US. And they actually are partnered with multiple sports teams. But at the Eagles Stadium, they have solar panels that they've installed over the parking lots and in the stadiums. And so these are solar panels that, one, help the Philadelphia Eagles be more sustainable, offset their energy use.
Right.
Show fans that the Eagles are sustainable if the fans happen to see the solar panels or notice them. And then also communicate to fans that NRG is a sustainable company who helps the Eagles be more sustainable because they see those energy logos on those solar panels. And so the really exciting thing is, it's great when fans think that their favorite team is sustainable, and it's great when they recognize that NRG is sustainable. But what's even better is when they say, oh, the Eagles do these great sustainability strategies and energy efficiency strategies. Maybe I can do that at home.
Right.
And NRG hopes that those fans use NRG to do that.
Right. Right. So they definitely must be having products that are more, for for fans, B2C products as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important that helps get the fans engaged. But even when they're not B2C, there's really interesting ways. I could actually use an example from the Eagles again.
Yeah.
There's a company called Braskem who makes plastics and other more kind of B2B products.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the Eagles Stadium, they collected the bottle caps from all of the bottles, and fans, that was kind of a point of engagement with fans. They turned in the bottle caps after they were done using them. And then those bottle caps were turned into a Lombardi trophy replica of a statue. So it was kind of a waste reduction strategy, closed loop strategy, and also fan engagement. And not necessarily, maybe that gets fans thinking about ways to recycle. Chances are they wouldn't interact with Braskem on their, day to day, but
Yeah.
it does get fans thinking about this and enhance that partnership between the Eagles and Braskem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, these are great small examples. So, I mean, I'm going off track in terms of sports, but yeah, I'd gone to a few music festivals in India, and so what they did was they made these reusable cups. So, and with a keychain attached to the cup. So, you could have your beers and then attach it to your jeans, and then when you want to have another beer, you can just pull it out of your take it out from your jeans and reuse the cup. So just these small things, and it appeared really fashionable. So just these small things can make such a huge difference to especially stadiums that have so many people.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of kind of fun ways, like you said, making it fashionable or even providing some kind of incentives to get people to interact with it. Maybe you can post a selfie with it with a hashtag initiative to show people that you are using this cup, or maybe there's even a cash incentive or a discount
Right.
on the beer because you're using that cup.
Right.
And I think, at music festivals and all of these different types of live events, this is really important. And it's a really easy way to engage with fans and also creates a fun souvenir. And right now, I'll just say that because of coronavirus and people's, kind of hesitation towards anything that might be contaminated with germs, the reusable industry is a bit at risk, I would say. I'm concerned that people are going to be nervous about these reusable cups because they might have contamination, where before that was less of a top of mind priority. And I think it's just important that, these initiatives are communicated in a way that shows that they are actually safe and guaranteed to be safe. Reusable cup, at a restaurant, you're reusing dishes or silverware and it's washed through a powerful system that guarantees its sanitation. And so these reusable cups can do the same thing. And I think it's important to make sure that that's communicated and kind of not forgotten because of the urgency of the virus.
Definitely. So, what are some of the ways that fans can be educated, a bit more apart from these small scale measures? Are there other ways that clubs and sports organizations can educate fans by engaging with them as well around sustainability?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's ways that organizations can through on-site activations during live events.
Right.
And so that's the really easy way. Right now, there are no live events with fans here in the US. So maybe it's through social media and using the power of other ways of communicating to get through to fans. So, Earth Day celebrated here in the US in April, and this year was the 50th anniversary, and it was really kind of during the early part of the crisis of
Right.
coronavirus. And So, it was a way that teams could engage with their fans on something different than the virus. And so using social media, and then even further using individual athletes to help communicate that is really impactful as well. So I actually work with a nonprofit that helps get athletes excited about talking more about sustainability and climate. And so I think that type of work is really important too, because individual athletes have such a huge following even outside of their sport, and even just one tweet or one Instagram post gets through to so many thousands, potentially millions of people, and can really create a big difference quickly.
Of course, and especially with these athletes, um, LeBron and Somi, Steph have such huge followings in India as well. So them, even tweeting or posting anything related to sustainability or the environment reaches basically the whole world, and it affects us as well, right? So influences us, in fact. So yeah, definitely, it's a huge thing.
Absolutely. And it's really about relating it to people, and finding new ways to get people interested and excited about it. And if you talk about something that's really far away that doesn't seem to impact someone's personal life, it's hard for them to latch onto. So talking about the polar ice caps melting thousands of miles away is important, and clearly critical, but it's probably not going to be the way to get people to change their day-to-day habits. But very small specific things, like maybe LeBron posting that he has offset his travel for the year with carbon offsets, or a donation to an organization trying to combat emissions, knowing that LeBron can't affect his daily schedule, but he can do something to help combat the effects of it, is so powerful.
Yeah, definitely. And it can be more relatable, like when you mentioned the polar bears and stuff, and North Antarctica or wherever, we can't relate to it, so we don't really pay much attention. But yeah, taking small actions, definitely anyone can, sometimes they may decide to take the bike or walk down a street, instead of taking a four-wheeler, and that makes a huge impact as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it can be really small, and unfortunately, everybody's looking for the really big, momentous moves and impactful strategies. But really, those day-to-day changes seem small, but can make a huge difference. Changing from throwing your food in the trash to trying to compost it and putting it back into the earth. One very small example, but has pretty big ramifications, especially when other people kind of emulate that.
Sure, sure. And okay, so now talk to us about the post-COVID world. What do you see? What do you foresee in happening in stadiums?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of changes, similar in the US. I often hear it compared to 9/11 and the security changes that happened after that we still see today, almost 20 years later. And so I think we're talking up and kind of talking and gearing up for these long-term effects. So for example, temperature checks, or increased hand washing stations, or mandatory masks, or maybe even increased distance away from other people in the stadiums are all being discussed. Realistically, I think a lot of those things will feel really important at first, and maybe kind of will fade away with some long-lasting effects that stay, just like here in the US, we take off our shoes when we go through airport security, for kind of one specific long-lasting effect that has come from 9/11. But I think on the whole, it's going to be much more about building back better than right now. I think that's a frequent conversation here, is how can we do things better while we're on this hiatus, so that, we don't just go back to what the easiest, most simple solution is to this very specific problem, but really, how do we make things better on the whole? And I think a great example is air quality. So air quality is something that, besides maybe in places in the US with high elevation, or, if there's maybe a forest fire nearby, we don't really think about air quality all too much, especially in a sports venue. But now it's looked at for so many different reasons. And I think, not just making sure that fans are safe and athletes are safe, but this brings back the concept of social equity, thinking about all of the people who are working behind the scenes, and what their air quality is and how healthy they are, because they're the ones that run that stadium, and they're unfortunately the ones that interact with and are potentially exposed to a lot of the germs from coronavirus.
Right.
And so these people are really critical, and keeping them healthy is incredibly important. And so this kind of build back better notion is thinking, okay, well, it's not just about getting fans back to the games safely and healthily, but also making sure that these venues are run efficiently and safely for everyone, and also sustainably. So I think another concern I have is, all of a sudden, every food that we used to serve just on an exposed surface, a plate or a dish, will now be wrapped in plastic first, or wrapped with an additional protective wear, which really adds up in terms of waste. And so thinking about ways to make this efficient and using technologies and innovations is going to be really critical to making sure that we don't just go back to that easiest, most simple thing, and we're actually doing something that makes, financial sense and also sense for people on the planet, to go back to those 3 Ps.
Of course. So yeah, I mean, um, basically right now they're going to care more about their current lives than something around a long term goals of climate change and stuff. So basically these changes have to be done simultaneously. They shouldn't like you mentioned, wrapping the food with plastic covers, and that has to be looked at as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, oftentimes these decisions are made so quickly,
Right.
and, maybe one-sided with one specific mission.
Right.
And yeah, it's important to think about these things holistically.
Sure. Sure. So to wrap things up, what is one piece of advice you'd give brands as sponsors?
One piece of advice I would say is to make sure that brands and sponsors are leaning on the people element of what they do. Looking at their core values and their corporate responsibility, and thinking about new ways to help sports teams, or to use sports teams really to deliver on those, and using those sports teams as kind of that way to get to people who may or may not be seeking some of the benefits of your kind of corporate responsibility. It's just such a powerful partnership when that's done effectively. And I also think calling people on their commitments is really important. So as consumers, we see corporate teams making these kind of big commitments or statements on
Right.
an issue that's happening right now. And I think we as consumers need to say, okay, are they actually following through on that? And really calling them out for not doing that is really important. And, we vote with our dollar as consumers. And so, or whatever that, whatever that is, we vote with that money. And so, we have the really the power to enact real change if we don't like something that a company is
Of course.
doing.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, a lot of these companies, they gain a lot of social currency by posting the stuff on social that they're committing this amount of money, or they're going to make these changes. And then we don't really know. I mean, they're not really accountable, because as fans, we don't have that, knowledge if they are following through. And that's very well said.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, if more people are aware of those commitments, the more chance we have to say, hey, wait a second, they're not doing what they said they would do. And I think, we used to maybe just ignore that or say, oh yeah, they're a company, they're never going to actually do that.
Hmm.
But I think now more than ever, we're actually at a point where we're ready to make sure that those things that they say they will do will actually get done.
Great, great. So, Kristen, thank you so much for sharing your amazing insights with us, with the listeners, and it was a pleasure having you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This is fun to talk about and think about, the kind of global application of it as well, not just here in the US.
Most definitely. So, why don't you tell our listeners all over the world where people can find you? Talk to us about your company, and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So my company is called Recipric,
Mhm.
Recipric, basically created from the notion of something being reciprocal or giving back in full circle. And Recipric is really about helping sports organizations, what we talked about, redefine home field advantage and find all of these new untapped ways to, promote fan engagement and loyalty, and also use the power of brands and partnerships to do that, and make that more robust. So you can find more about Recipric on our website, recipric.com, on Instagram and Twitter at Recipric, and on LinkedIn as well, just searching the name Recipric. So yeah, thank you so much for having me and allowing me to share some of that.
Great. So, guys, please do follow all their pages, and please do get in touch with Kristen for any help you may need with regards to consultancy or any projects. And we'll have all their handles on the show notes, so it'll be easy for you to get in touch with them. Thank you, Kristen.
Great, thanks so much.
Yeah.